Hi, I'm Lisa Loomis, and I'm here in the studios of Mad River Valley Television on a Friday with Devin Klein, one of the partners in Corrigan Klein building. We're going to talk about housing, housing sustainability, housing attainability, workforce housing, and housing resilience. Devin, thanks for coming today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So tell me, how did you get interested in the construction field?
I grew up in the construction field. My father was involved with it, and I started working a little bit with my now husband, with whom I have a company, and we were really interested in changing the way that the construction industry works. There were some elements of how things are done with which we didn't agree. So we decided to found our own company and try and approach the building process with more sustainability in mind, with sourcing our resources more locally, and having a little bit more transparency and commitment to pricing with our clients.
Flesh that out a little bit for me. So I think you and I had talked earlier for a Valerie Porter story, and you talked about using local materials, starting with local woods, local field stone.
Right.
What else do you...
Well, primarily we source the wood products are the easiest thing to get locally. After the recession in 2008, a lot of the mills across the state closed, and we have some of the finest hardwoods in the world. So what we do is we partner with loggers and log yards, and we source our own logs to then mill our timbers, off of which we get a lot of other wood products, be that sheathing or trim or flooring or cabinetry wood. Roof sheathing, a lot of elements from just that one log that might not be being used that way by your average building company. They're buying from lumber yards, they're shipping materials in from great distances. Some of them might buy some products from the local mills. For example, Ward's clapboard mills, those are still regularly used. But we're able to achieve a higher percentage of the wood products used in that construction project from original log length in our yard.
How long have you guys been in business?
Since July of 2012.
Wow, that's a long time. 8 years coming up.
Yeah.
Coming up on that.
Yeah.
So when we talked a little bit, you just talked about local, and then let's talk a little bit about sustainability and tie it back to resiliency as we work our way into climate change.
Yeah. So we're obviously dealing with a world in which sustainability and resiliency are becoming increasingly important. We're aware that climate change is affecting the way that our houses function, the way that our rivers rise, snowfall, waterfall, etc. So when we think about sustainability, it's very much tied to resiliency. We want to be using minimally processed resources so that we reduce the amount of carbon used in any processing. That said, we all still rely somewhat on fossil fuels. We are looking into moving toward an electric mill, and our workshop is presently about 80% solar powered. But what we want to achieve is using as many local resources as we can while achieving the best standard of resiliency. So we don't want to be doing things twice. We don't want to be putting things like asphalt shingles that are being heavily manufactured and shipped around the country on a house just because it's going to save us a little bit of money now.
You brought a picture to demonstrate that, right?
Well, yes, there is
photograph?
a photograph that we have, and it's a house that we've renovated with replacing the standing seam.
I see that, the roof, and then it looks like you brought the gutter edge out a little bit.
The overhang existed, but what we did do is we replaced the rod on the bottom of that structure. You can see there's sort of a black or brown band there, and that's a metal band along the bottom of the house just above the foundation so that that portion of the siding is no longer susceptible to rot. I'm sure we're familiar with replacing the bottom 2 to 3 feet of our siding.
So that's just one simple example
it's
of
a very
how
simple
to
example.
have to build something once.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Or other kinds of products on the house, using cedar for our soffits and fascia so that they don't rot as quickly as maybe just a pine. There are all kinds of wood species that allow us to achieve a higher level of resiliency while maintaining the sustainable element of sourcing locally. For example, white oak. Most people don't think about white oak coming from New England. Well, just over the lake in New York, around the Hudson River Valley, there's a lot of white oak. There's also a significant amount in the Champlain Valley. And we source that oak to use in place of pressure-treated lumber. So we build a lot of our outdoor structures using that material. It's highly rot resistant, it lasts longer than PT, and it's beautiful.
What about inside the house? What in the kitchen? How can I make my kitchen, other than the cabinets, what about my countertop materials?
Yeah, well, we have a lot of stones available to us here, specifically granite and marble. The Verde is beautiful, but they tend to be expensive. One application that we've been using a lot in countertops, instead of just having a slab of wood, which is really nice anywhere not near water, so we can still make use of beautiful live edge slabs and have a really organic feel, or you can have a more polished feel with a stainless steel wrapped countertop. And then you're using some sort of wood underneath and a layer of stainless steel. It can be brushed, it can be left as it is and just sort of worn from use. And it's really industrial, very easy to clean. And steel is, typically a recyclable product. However, stainless steel does require some purity, so it's not usually a post-consumer product.
So when you and I had talked earlier this year, or last year, when we were talking about a specific parcel of land on Route 17 that many people community groups are considering for affordable housing or workforce housing, we had talked about, let's go back to that kind of model you discussed, singles, duplexes, and I think you mentioned very specifically something about how to keep the costs inside down while meeting your primary goals of sustainability, local, and resilient.
Yeah. Well, there are a number of ways that we can reduce the cost to outfit a house. So the general framing construction is about the same, no matter who's doing it. That said, we do it a little differently with our timber frames. But besides that, there are ways that we can avoid doing things twice. For example, we often apply what we call a subfloor. Then we may have another layer of flooring on top of that. We can use one material that provides both that subfloor and a finished floor material. And it can have a beautiful rustic Vermont farmhouse kind of look. It could be a bit more polished, but it's difficult to achieve that if you're going to use the subfloor. So if you're happy with something that looks like it's old, it's worn, it's lived in. And I think that when we're talking about affordability, we're not always talking about what is the ideal dream of my kitchen. We're talking about how do we build structures that are safe, that are beautiful, that will provide people a happy, healthy place to raise a family or to come home to after a long day at work.
Formaldehyde. I just remembered that from our first conversation, right?
Well,
that's what off gas is the formaldehyde?
I'm not sure if it's the formaldehyde in particular, but a lot of the spray foams have dangerous off-gassing, and a lot of laminates continue to off-gas throughout the life of the product, and plastics in particular. There was an interesting study done by, I think it was the New York City Fire Department, in which they were discussing the average rate at which a house burns is completely engulfed in flames. And in the 1950s, the average rate of a house becoming completely engulfed was 17 minutes. Our modern homes, built within the last 20 years, tend to be completely engulfed within 3 minutes. So if you think about the amount of
because of the
time,
materials.
it's because of the plastics.
Oh, wow.
It's primarily plastics, be that in carpets, upholsteries, wall applications, curtains, towels,
wow,
shower curtains.
That's disconcerting.
We're covering our worlds with plastics.
We're inundated with plastics, yeah.
And even a lot of the green building techniques, which are striving for sustainability, they use a lot of plastics-based products.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit problematic.
So let's go back to housing in the Valley. And what do you think is the biggest impediment? It's not like I'm asking you to solve the world's most complex physics problem. I'm sorry about that. But what is the most, how do you see the issue with housing here in the Valley? Is it land? Is it lack of municipal wastewater and water? As a builder, as somebody in the trades.
Yeah, well, and also as someone who's lived here for most of my life. I think it's multifaceted, which is part of why we struggle with figuring out how to fix it. But the municipality element is very important, and we need to start sorting that out. As far as affordable housing is, in my opinion, most easily achieved in areas where traffic routes are commonplace, where people are often driving by so that we can work with things like the what is it?
Public transit.
Public
Yeah.
transit and ride sharing or
Yeah.
walking to work, you know. So keeping development in town centers is a good idea. Therefore, we need to address the water issue. Another thing that I see as an issue from my time on the Development Review Board in Warren are the zoning ordinances. And we have some restrictive ordinances as far as population density per acre is concerned. So we need to do some work on the municipal level with the planning commissions and talk about how do we allow for responsible, higher density development in those sort of less rural areas.
The areas that have been identified as appropriate for
As
infill
appropriate.
development, right?
Right. And so I also think that part of the problem is the way we conceive of our idea of a home. You know, the American dream and its white picket fence with the yard and the cars and the dog running around is really wonderful. But how do we achieve that in a way that we can live more closely with one another instead of everyone having to have their own 12 acres? That's not affordable, especially for young people getting into their professions or young families just trying to keep up with bills. So I think we need to be looking at planning our communities a little bit better and looking at multi-unit development the way we were discussing earlier, be that single family dwelling, maybe we include retirement apartment,
Multi-age, multi-income level.
multi-income
Yeah.
level. We want everybody together. It has been proven that that promotes the health and wellness of all, you know, and childcare. We can talk about childcare. We know that if you have a number of people of retirement age living in an apartment building and some young families and someone's home sick from school, but mom still has to go to work, dad left at 6 o'clock in the morning, and oh my gosh, well, maybe the neighbor up down the hall
Will watch the baby for
the
today,
baby
yeah.
for today, or whatever that is. You know, we can foster community by coming together in that
So there's
way.
that TJ Kingsbury project, you know, at the bottom of North Face Airport Road, where he's proposed, it's near the new playing fields.
Okay,
So
Airport Road and
he's
Facein.
proposed like an apartment building, and I don't remember how many units, 24, and then like on the other side of Airport Road, another certain number, 24, of little small cottages, all interconnected by pathways.
Yeah.
And that was ideally designed for senior housing, but
Right.
it'd be perfect for mixed age housing. Right, that's the
Yeah,
kind
and
of a
what's
project.
nice about that is it's really close to all of those playing fields.
Right, for the kids.
For the
Yeah.
kids that fly in. And that was another element of what I was going to say. When we talk about affordable housing, we need also to consider outside space. So we have to, and that is something that the zoning ordinances often address. You
Yes,
need a
open
certain
space.
number of
Yeah.
acreage that is dedicated to green space per unit of development.
Were you on the DRB when the common man conversion into those
I was not.
4 units? Because they got a density bonus for adding green space. For making 50% of that lot is green.
Yes,
Not
and
50,
and
maybe
that's great. I like the change of use from a restaurant that's been struggling for decades into residential. However, it doesn't really fit the affordability
No,
bill.
no, they're rentals. They're
Yeah.
short-term rentals, which is another issue we have, which is different from building affordable housing,
Yeah.
which is short-term rentals taking up our housing stock. But we better not go down that rabbit hole.
No, but that is sort of in line with what we're talking about with how we conceive of housing. We need to, as a community, decide to devote our resources to that which will foster our community, right? And so while having those short-term rentals and seasonal rentals is really important, we need that. We also need a certain number of affordable housing
Units.
options.
Attainable, affordable,
Yeah.
workforce,
And that
whatever
doesn't, I don't think that that has to mean year-round. I think that there are some really interesting options to include something like a boarding house, so that you have young people who are considering moving here and they can rent a room in a communal home, share a kitchen, share a bathroom,
I think Warren
fostering community.
is just changing its zoning to, because Warren used to have a definition of a
It does
rooming house,
still.
and they were getting rid of it because it said you could stay there for no more. It was date specific. You could stay there for no more than 10 days or 30 days. And I think the Planning Commission is entertaining a proposal, or even has one written, to make that number go away.
I'm not familiar with that in particular, but the ordinance, as I read it, doesn't have a restriction. So, maybe it's already
maybe they already
passed.
changed it, because that would help Sugarbush and
would be
other
great.
people who use seasonal
Yeah.
employees.
Yeah.
And
Or someone who, we have some wonderful businesses in the Valley. Say they want to come work at Creative Microsystems and they're a new hire. They're not sure they're going to like living in the Valley. Well, rent a room at the boarding house for 3 months and see how you like it.
yeah,
That's something that we don't really have a lot of access to.
that would be ideal to be in our village center, walkability
Yeah.
to everything. Probably,
And there are some buildings that are presently going unused that
Yeah.
could definitely be converted into that. So I'm not familiar with the ordinance in Waitsfield, but that's definitely a pretty good workaround in Warren.
the Waitsfield Planning Commission, you may be aware, has proposed planned hamlet development,
Yes.
which would increase density on specific parcels that meet specific environmental criteria, not too close to the water, not too steep, very specific. And that proposal got to the select board where it lingers. It has not yet come back for the select board to approve it, but it's got some really very good and very significant changes to density, which could
Yeah.
change. And density is one of the things, I think, if we come back to affordable housing, if you had a 6-acre piece of land and could build, and I'm making up these numbers from scratch because I don't remember the exact numbers for Waitsfield's plan.
Presently, you would be able to build, according to Warren, 12
So
units,
this
'cause you
density-
can build a duplex per acre.
So this thing that Waitsfield's going to do would change that dramatically. And I'm just going from memory here, but 6 acres, I think you could have as many as 24 units.
Yeah.
And you have to have obviously some open space.
Right.
But that would start to give you some economy of scale for
Yeah.
septic and wastewater, or for
Absolutely.
water and wastewater.
Right.
So let's come back to the proposal that's being floated. It's not actually before voters yet, to create a tri-town local option tax.
Right.
With a tax on rooms, meals, alcohol sales tax, and retail sales, already subject to the state sales tax. That would raise approximately $1 million, of which the towns would keep $700,000. And housing is the most important project that's been identified so far as needing money. So how might a grant or a grant or a loan or a gift of X number of dollars help you and your husband and other builders leverage funds for something like building 24 units on 6 acres?
Right. Well, I think the local option tax provides money that's much needed to make a project working toward affordability more palatable. When you're building affordable units, there's less payback,
Less margin.
right?
Right.
Because you're not going to be charging as high rents. So offering that incentive to cover the costs of some of the more expensive and less attractive elements of building, like wastewater, septic, site work, electrical, stuff like that.
The not sexy things.
The not sexy
Right.
things, all the things that
Right.
our clients are like, really? That costs so much? And it does.
Yeah.
It's a very large portion of the project. And it doesn't really matter where that money goes. It's a matter of percentage. It's does it make this project get off the ground? If I can replace a certain portion of the cost to build, then I know that the income coming in will cover it and maybe make a little bit of money. I think it's also an interesting opportunity to develop without just private development, right? There might be room there with the LOT to discuss all of these different community boards that are trying to approach affordable
Some sort of
housing.
public-private
Some kind
partnership.
of public-private partnership. I think that could be really great. And maybe even if the municipality spearheaded it and they were to be in charge of something like that.
Now, the newly constituted, we have a new housing coalition, which is really doing some great work. Are you on it?
I am not.
So that housing coalition has, and the Mad River Valley Planning District have recently gotten this housing report back, which long awaited, much anticipated, because it's going to outline what we have for housing, what we need in
Right.
terms of short-term rental, long-term rental, seasonal rental, a home for a school teacher to buy.
Yeah.
And it's been spinning trying to open on my computer screen since I got it on Wednesday, so I haven't actually been able to read it. But I'm expecting that that's going to help.
Well, it'll help identify the needs.
Right. It'll help
Yeah.
maybe create an umbrella under which our 3 towns can work.
Yeah.
For-
And I think that we need to work together. It's really important that we put aside our differences.
Right.
and work together towards something that we know we all need. And the local option tax is frustrating for some people because we don't like taxes. We see so many tax dollars go to things that we don't believe in. But the local option tax is a locally controlled tax. It gives us an opportunity to make those tax dollars do what we actually want.
And as John Jameson says, we invest 12 cents, we get 88 cents back, because 88 cents on every, this is according to the proponents of the Tri-Town local option tax, 88 cents of every dollar raised is coming from visitors to our community, and 12 cents is coming from us,
Right.
those of us who live here.
Yeah.
That's a pretty good investment.
It's a pretty good investment.
I think if you were to take it in aggregate over 10 years and invest $7 million in housing, I mean, we have other needs that have
Right.
been identified in terms of marketing, recreation, transportation. Certainly, if we're going to build housing, we better have some transportation to get people
True.
from point A to point B.
Yeah.
But it would be very impactful, $7 million over 10 years.
It would,
towards
and certainly
housing.
more impactful than what we presently have, which is nothing.
Right.
We
Well,
have to start somewhere.
I really appreciate you coming into the studio today. It's been
Thank
great
you.
talking to you. I'm sure we'll talk some more because this issue's not going away.
It's not.
Thanks, Devin.
Thank you, Lisa.
And I'm Lisa Loomis, and this has been a community conversation at Mad River Valley Television.